A woman can smile at you with holy lips while sharpening a knife behind her back. That was the only thought running through my mind the morning my mother-in-law stood on that church stage, Bible in her hand, choir swaying behind her, and called me an unworthy wife in front of 200 people. I remember the sound first. Not her voice, not the gasps, not even my husband's sharp inhale beside me, but the thick, embarrassed hum that fills a sanctuary when people don't know where to look. That strange, uncomfortable silence that spreads like fog. I felt it settling on my shoulders, warm at first, then heavy, almost suffocating. The church fans stopped moving. The old piano in the corner ticked like cooling metal. Somewhere behind me, a child whispered, "Mama, who's she talking about?" And my mother-in-law, Sister Lorraine Matthews, First Lady of Greater Trinity Baptist, the woman who never missed a Sunday, who collected respect the way other people collect jewelry, lifted her chin and said without blinking, "She dishonors my son. A woman like that brings shame into a family." The congregation didn't know she was talking about me, not yet, but she wanted them to. I could see it in the slow, deliberate way her eyes found mine, held me, pinned me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a planned attack, a public shaming, delivered from the pulpit. I didn't cry, not then. I just sat there, back straight, palms pressed against my dress, and felt the ground tilt as if something quiet and sacred inside me had snapped. And the strangest part, my husband didn't move, didn't speak, didn't reach for my hand. He just stared forward, jaw tight, pretending not to notice that his own mother was skinning me alive with scripture. That was the day everything changed. But to understand why, to understand how a woman of God could humiliate her own daughter-in-law before her whole congregation, you'd have to know what life looked like before the storm, before the lies, before the manipulation, before the secrets under those perfect Sunday hats. So let me take you back. Let me tell you how it all began. Before all this, my life was simple, quiet, predictable in the way a small-town morning is predictable, with its warm routines and gentle patterns. I grew up in a neighborhood where folks still waved from their porches, where the mailman knew everybody by name, and where my mother would leave the house smelling like she'd been cooking greens, even when she hadn't touched a stove. Life wasn't perfect, no, but it was steady. And I valued steady more than anything, especially after watching my own parents fight their marriage into the ground. Years of slammed doors, whispered arguments, and empty promises echoing through a too-small house. So when I met Anthony, my husband, Lord, I thought I had found peace. He was soft-spoken, with a voice that felt like warm tea on a cold night. He listened more than he talked, picked up groceries without me asking, and he reminded me of consistency, the stable, gentle kind of man my heart believed didn't exist anymore. I fell for him fast, the kind of fast that makes your friends ask if you're sure, and makes your mama raise an eyebrow so high it practically sits on her hairline. I was 27, he was 29, and his mother? Whew, she was the only hesitation I had when it came to that marriage. Sister Lorraine wasn't cruel at first. No, ma'am, she was something more dangerous, polite with purpose. She'd smile at me, long and slow, with lips pressed like she was holding back both praise and judgment at the same time. She'd compliment my dress, then follow it with, "But some fabrics cling in ways the Lord wouldn't approve of." She'd give me her old cookware, then say, "These pots served my family well for years. A wife who honors her husband knows the value of a home-cooked meal." Always soft, always sweet, and always just sharp enough to leave a thin scratch on my pride. But Anthony adored her. He grew up in that church, practically raised in its halls, baptized at 12, choir at 15, junior deacon at 18. His mother was known as a woman of leadership and spiritual excellence, as the church folks like to say. So, whenever she said something sideways, I swallowed it, smiled, told myself she'd warm up eventually. Most days, I tried not to let her overshadow the good parts of my life. Because there were good parts. Mornings with Anthony, making coffee while humming old gospel tunes under his breath. Evenings where we'd sit on the porch, listening to the Crickets perform their nightly concert. The little apartment off Willow Street that always smelled faintly of lavender and whatever candle I'd burned the night before. We were building something, a home, a future. And in those early days, it felt real. It felt stable. It felt blessed. Even if his mother hovered like a shadow over every one of our decisions. Even if her concern felt more like surveillance. Even if she showed up unannounced just to check on my boy, but always found a way to evaluate me in the process. I told myself it was okay. Every marriage comes with challenges. And a mother-in-law? Well, sometimes they just need time. If only I had known that behind those gentle smiles, behind that perfect Sunday hat, behind those carefully chosen Bible verses, she was building something, a story, a narrative, a quiet, poisonous reputation about me, piece by piece. And the day she humiliated me on that church stage, that wasn't the beginning. It was the moment all her work finally bore fruit. But I didn't know that yet. Back then, I still believed the best in her. Still thought every tightly wrapped sentence was just old-fashioned motherly concern. Still thought Anthony and I were safe. Still thought God wouldn't let a woman use his house as a weapon. But life, it has a way of revealing the truth, one whisper at a time. And soon enough, the whispers started. They say the first year of marriage shows you who a person really is. But for me, the reveal started the moment the wedding ring slid onto our fingers. It's strange how quickly a home can shift. One week, you're fluffed up on the sweetness of new beginnings, and the next, something unsettles the air, like a quiet rearranging of the rules. Our apartment smelled of fresh paint and lavender candles the first night we came back as husband and wife. I cooked us a small dinner, lemon chicken, roasted potatoes, and set it on the table like a peace offering, though I didn't know what I was trying to prevent. David walked in from the bedroom still wearing his wedding band like it weighed something. He looked at the table, then at me. "You used too much seasoning," he murmured. Not mean, just direct. "Oh, I can fix it next time," I said, though that wasn't the point. He nodded, like a supervisor giving feedback, then sat down. We ate in silence. I thought it was nerves, or exhaustion, or the fact that marriage is a shift too big to fit into one evening. But over the next few days, that silence grew a personality of its own. It started with small things. "Don't leave the shoes there. You shouldn't talk like that. That friend of yours is too messy. Married women move different." The tone was never angry, just instructive, as if I was someone to be molded. 3 weeks in, he told me to stop buying my favorite vanilla lotion because the smell is too loud around people who are sensitive. Sensitive meaning his mother, who once told me vanilla scents were too worldly. 2 months in, he told me not to wear jeans to his family cookout because Mama thinks a wife should present herself with dignity. 3 months in, he told me I was too opinionated during a discussion with his cousins about politics, even though they were the ones shouting. But it wasn't what he said that worried me. It was how easily I started adjusting, accommodating, shrinking. Because every correction was followed by something sweet. A kiss, a compliment, a soft, "Baby, you know I love you." Love became the excuse that softened the bruise of every demand. For a woman who claimed to be hands off, my mother-in-law had her fingerprints on everything in our marriage. She'd call David every morning, to pray with him. But prayer turned into commentary, commentary into instructions, instructions into emotional manipulation. David, a godly home needs structure. David, don't let the enemy create disorder. David, a wife must reflect her husband. Reflect him, not stand beside him, not walk with him. Reflect. Like I was a mirror with no image of my own. One Sunday, she invited us to her house for lunch, which wasn't really an invitation. If she told David to be somewhere, he went without question. I walked into her kitchen and placed a small dessert on the table, peach cobbler I had baked that morning. She glanced at it, then at me. You used canned peaches." "No, ma'am," I answered softly. "Fresh ones." She lifted the dish, sniffed it, and set it down like I had handed her a bowl of dirt. "Well, it smells canned." I swallowed the embarrassment, smoothing my dress while David stood beside her, quiet, always quiet when she belittled me. And that quiet was louder than anything he could have said. People talk about abusive men like they come with neon warning signs, like they scowl all day or talk with fists or stomp around houses like storm clouds. But the most dangerous ones are gentle in public. David was polite, charming, helpful, the man who carried heavy groceries for neighbors, who prayed for people in need, who volunteered at church events with a smile bright enough to win trust. He could transform his whole spirit in front of others. At home, a different version of him lived. Not violent, not cruel, just tightening. Like someone adjusting a belt hole by hole, correcting me privately, defending his mother publicly, dissecting my words, controlling my clothing, managing my smile. One evening, he came home from work and found me watching a show. He walked in and asked, "Why is the house so quiet?" "I'm just relaxing," I said. "I didn't realize it was—" "You need to have music on. Homes should feel alive." He wasn't asking, he was stating. I turned on the music. He kissed my forehead afterwards, as if rewarding obedience. And still, I told myself I was imagining things, because when he held me at night, when he whispered that he loved me, when he prayed over us before bed, it was hard to reconcile the tightening with the tenderness. But that's how cycles work. Cruelty becomes harder to detect when wrapped in softness. The moment I should have taken seriously happened one Sunday after service. We were standing in the parking lot with a group of church members. I mentioned lightly, jokingly, that David always left the milk out. Everyone laughed. Everyone, except David. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. And he placed a hand on my lower back with a pressure that was not affectionate. When we got into the car, he didn't start the engine. "You're not funny," he said. "I didn't mean—" "You embarrassed me. Don't ever do that again." His tone was low, controlled, not loud, not angry, just final. I whispered, "I'm sorry." He nodded once, only once. The drive home was silent. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally said, "You're my wife. You represent me. Remember that." Represent, as if I was a political figure or property. That night I cried quietly in the shower, telling myself it wasn't that serious. telling myself I loved him, telling myself all marriages had bumps. But something inside me, some tiny trembling part, whispered, "This is how it starts." A week later, her mother asked me to stand beside her during offering time, something she had never done before. Her voice was syrup sweet, but her eyes were sharp. I didn't know what was coming, but I felt it. And Lord, that moment was the beginning of everything that followed. I should have known something was off when David's mother looped her arm through mine as we walked toward the front of the church during offering. She never touched me, not casually, not warmly, certainly not affectionately. Her fingers wrapped around my forearm like she was guiding a child who couldn't be trusted to walk on her own. The congregation's eyes followed us, hers lifted in pleasant piety, mine searching for David, who stood near the sound booth, watching. Something in his expression tightened when he realized what she was doing. Not anger, no, he never showed that. More like expectation. We reached the front. The choir hummed softly. People stood, swaying, preparing to give. And then she whispered, so faint only I could hear, "Stand here. Don't move." I didn't know why, but I obeyed. She stepped aside, leaving me awkwardly alone near the pulpit as she took the microphone. My stomach dropped. No one told me she'd be speaking. No one told me I would be part of whatever this was. When she turned toward the congregation, her voice rang out loud and bright. "Church, today, I want to thank God for obedience in the home." People murmured their amens. She continued, "A marriage is strengthened when a wife knows her role, when she honors her husband without question, without backtalk, without bringing worldly attitudes into a godly house." Her words sliced the air like thin blades. I glanced at David. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just watched. His expression was unreadable, not supportive, not protective, just neutral. Like he was evaluating whether I would stand correctly. His mother placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to root me in place. "Some wives," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, "still need guidance to learn humility, and God, in his mercy, gives them strong husbands to lead them." The congregation nodded, hummed, clapped softly. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened. I felt stripped open, exposed, corrected in front of an entire sanctuary without a single word being directed at me. Her grip on my shoulder tightened again, almost imperceptibly. "This woman," she said, patting me twice like a dog, "has potential, if she listens." A smattering of mm-hms and murmurs filled the room. Potential, if I listened. I forced a smile that barely held its shape. When she finally dismissed the offering, my knees almost buckled as people passed, placing envelopes in the basket. Some smiled at me politely. Others gave me that look of seasoned church folk who know what correction smells like. David walked up last, placing his envelope in the basket. He didn't look at me. He kissed his mother on the cheek. He walked back to his seat. Not a glance, not a check-in, not a whisper of support, just absence. I stood there until offering ended, until the choir started a new song, until the pastor stepped forward and gently told me, "You can take your seat, sweetheart." I walked back down the aisle, feeling every eye, every interpretation, every assumption. Humiliation soaked through me like sweat. When I slid into the pew beside David, he leaned close and whispered, "You did good." Good? For what? For being paraded like an object lesson? For letting his mother use me as a sermon illustration without my consent? I stared ahead at the pastor, blinking back tears. David placed his hand on my thigh, not affectionately, but possessively, and whispered, "We'll talk later." In the car, he didn't turn the engine right away. "You embarrassed my mother." I snapped my eyes toward him. "How? I didn't even—" "You looked ungrateful, defensive, cold." I stared at him, shocked. "David, your mother crossed a line." He folded his hands calmly on the steering wheel.
You're my wife. She has every right to correct you. Correct. Correct. That word again, pounding through the car like a heartbeat. I parted my lips, stunned into silence. He nodded, satisfied with my quiet. Good, he said softly. We'll move forward. With that, he started the car as if the conversation was complete, the verdict delivered, the judgment final. And for the first time since I married him, a frightening thought crept into me like cold water leaking under a door. This man will always choose her over me. This man will never protect me. This man does not see me as a partner, but as a reflection of his mother's expectations. That realization didn't free me. It cornered me. Because once you see the cage, you also see the locked door. That night, while David slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling something in my spirit tilt. Not break, not collapse, just tilt. A shift so small it could be mistaken for nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was the beginning of the end. The slow unraveling of the version of me who thought love could be built on obedience. The quiet birth of the version who would one day leave. But at that moment, I didn't know what was coming. I only knew one thing. I was starting to fear the man I married.
I learned something strange that day. Sometimes the quiet moments are the ones that shake you the most. It was a Tuesday afternoon, warm enough that I had the windows cracked open while I folded laundry. The breeze carried the sound of distant children playing, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a life where David and I would have our own child's laughter filling this house. I clung to that dream like a lifeline. I was just smoothing the corner of one of David's shirts when my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. At first, I ignored it. Spam, probably. But something made me pick it up again. The text read, "I'm praying for you. I see what's happening." I froze. My heartbeat quickened, thudding against my ribs. What? Another message came through almost instantly, as if they could feel my confusion through the phone. Another message came through almost instantly, as if they could feel my confusion through the phone. He wasn't always like this, but you need to be careful. My mouth went dry. My hands trembled around the phone. Careful? Who was this? And how did they know anything about my marriage? I typed a quick reply. Who is this? No response. The 3 dots never appeared. The silence stretched long enough to feel personal. I swallowed hard and locked my phone. I told myself not to overthink it. People misdial. Messages get sent to wrong numbers. Maybe someone thought I was someone else named whoever. But the words dug into me. I see what's happening. Even if nothing terrible had happened yet, not physically, something was happening, wasn't it? That hollow feeling in my chest when David raised his voice. The way my body stiffened when he walked into a room. The way his mother's words clung to my skin like wet leaves. I exhaled slowly and went back to folding clothes. But it felt like the house had tilted slightly to the left. Everything felt off balance now. That evening, David came home later than usual. He walked in, humming like he had no weight on his shoulders at all. He kissed my forehead without even looking at me fully, his eyes already drifting toward his phone screen. "Busy day?" I asked softly. "Hectic," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. "You wouldn't understand." The words stung, but they weren't new. I forced a small smile. "Chicken is almost ready." He stopped mid-step. "Chicken again?" His tone had that sharp edge, the one that told me whatever I said next was going to be the wrong thing. "It's what we had in the freezer," I answered gently. He clicked his tongue, annoyed. "You didn't check before cooking? My mother taught you better than that." There it was again, her name, her shadow, always stretching across our living room, our bedroom, our meals. I didn't say anything. I'd learned silence was safer. But as we sat down, David's phone buzzed, and he snatched it quickly, too quickly. His eyes flicked over the screen, then he turned the phone face down on the table. "Work?" I asked as casually as I could. He hesitated. "Yeah." But he didn't look at me when he said it. His jaw twitched.
His breath shortened just enough that someone who didn't know him might not notice. But I noticed. I noticed everything. And then another message came to my own phone in the kitchen, vibrating against the counter. My stomach dropped. David paused mid-bite. "Who's texting you this late?" he asked. His tone had changed completely. Colder, suspicious, sharp in a way that felt dangerous. I forced a calm expression, probably a reminder from the grocery app. He watched me, really watched me, as if trying to read the truth in the movement of my eyelashes. "Bring it here," he said. My blood ran cold. "What?" "Your phone. Bring it here." My hands felt like they weren't mine as I stood up and went to the kitchen. My heart hammered. My breath felt trapped. I picked up the phone, but the message was already gone. Deleted. I hadn't touched it. Someone had sent it and then pulled it back. A chill moved down my spine. I returned to the table and handed the phone to David. He unlocked it, scrolling through my messages with rapid, irritated taps. Nothing. "See?" I said, gently. "Just apps. Nothing strange." David stared at the screen, another moment before shoving it back toward me. "You need to be careful who you talk to. You're too trusting." The irony stung so badly I had to hide my hands under the table so he wouldn't see them tremble. That night, after David fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The unknown number, David's reaction, the deleted message, the growing tightness in his voice lately, the way his mother's eyes followed me like she knew a secret I didn't. Something wasn't right. And for the first time, I stopped trying to convince myself it was just in my head. Something was happening, and someone, I didn't know who, was watching it. Watching me. Watching us. And they were warning me. But about what? And why?
The night everything snapped wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive or theatrical. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a held breath before a storm. It was a Friday evening, warm rain tapping against the windows, making soft patterns on the glass. I had just finished washing the dishes when I heard David downstairs in his office. His voice was hushed, but tense, angry. I wouldn't normally eavesdrop, but something in his tone made my feet stay planted. "I told you," he hissed, "keep your mouth shut. She doesn't know anything." My pulse stumbled. Was he talking about me? "I don't care," he snapped. "If she finds out, it's over. All of it." My hand flew up to cover my mouth. Finds out what? I stepped closer to the stairwell, holding my breath. "I said, I'll handle her," he muttered, his voice low and sharp. "Stop texting her. You're going to ruin everything." And then a pause. A long one. Then he said something that made my legs almost buckle. "Because if she leaves, my mother will blame me." A cold wave washed over my whole body. I didn't hear the rest. His words blurred into a muffled growl because the ground under me felt like it shifted, like the floorboards were no longer steady. Handle me? Stop texting me? Who was texting me? What were they trying to warn me about? I backed away from the stairwell, heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he could hear it. But the real breaking point didn't come until later that night. When I went upstairs to our bedroom, David was already sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. He looked agitated, restless, like a man holding a lit match dangerously close to gasoline. When he finally looked up at me, something in his eyes made my skin go cold. "You've been distant," he said quietly. Too quietly. I forced a calm breath. "I've been tired. That's all." "Tired," he echoed, nodding slowly. He stood, walked toward me. Each step made the air thicker. "You know," he murmured, "sometimes I wonder if you're hiding something." My spine stiffened. "Like what?" He smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was tight, wrong, empty. "You tell me." I took a small step back,
David, I'm not hiding anything. His eyes darkened. Then why, he said, his voice rising by a fraction, did my mother call me earlier crying? I blinked, startled. Crying? Why would she? She said, you've been disrespectful to her, cold, ungrateful. That wasn't true. Not even close. David, I said softly, that's not what— He slammed his hand against the wall behind me. I flinched. I couldn't help it. His face twisted with something I'd never seen before, or maybe something he'd been hiding well. You think you can embarrass me? He spat. Her? After everything she's done for you? The unknown number? His phone calls? Her quiet, smug smiles? The way she turned the congregation against me little by little? Everything clicked. They were creating something, a narrative. One where I was the ungrateful, unstable woman they patiently put up with. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. David, I've never disrespected your mother. Don't lie to me, he roared. His hand moved fast, too fast. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to shake me. Why are you making everything so difficult? He hissed. My chest tightened. I pulled my hand back, gently, careful not to ignite him further. I'm not trying to make anything difficult. But something in him had already snapped. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his breathing turned uneven. He stepped closer again, pressing me back against the wall. You're going to ruin everything, he whispered. You know that. You and your paranoia. I shook my head, fear creeping up my throat. I'm not paranoid. Then who's been texting you? He demanded. My breath hitched. I don't know, I said honestly. He stared at me so deeply, I felt exposed down to my bones. If you lie to me again— His voice broke off abruptly. He leaned in, so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. For a moment, I thought he might— I wasn't even sure. But something violent lived in the space between us. I closed my eyes. David, you're hurting me. Silence. Then suddenly he let go. He stepped back. His expression shifted like a storm passing over his face. Anger, confusion, guilt, and something I couldn't name. He ran his hand through his hair. I didn't mean to, he muttered. I've been stressed. You don't understand pressure. I didn't respond. He looked at me again, that flickering guilt replaced by something colder. Just do better, he said flatly. Then he walked out. Just walked out, leaving me there, breathless, shaking, and realizing something terrifying. This wasn't stress. This wasn't pressure. This wasn't a bad moment. This was a man losing control. And this time, he had shown me exactly what he was capable of. And I knew, with a sinking heaviness in my stomach, this wasn't the climax. This was the beginning of the fall. The quiet before the storm broke open completely.
For the next 2 days, David moved around the house like a shadow, silent, unpredictable, watching me without saying much. It wasn't love in his eyes anymore. It wasn't even resentment. It was calculation. Like he was trying to see how much I knew, what I suspected, what pieces of truth had slipped through the cracks of the world he and his mother had built around me. But the truth didn't reveal itself in a dramatic way. It came quietly. Saturday morning, I woke early. My nerves were too raw to sleep, and the house felt tense, like the walls were holding their breath. I tiptoed downstairs to make myself some tea. The kettle clicked softly as it heated, and the rain had finally cleared, leaving the windows streaked with silver. I reached for my phone on the counter, then froze. A message from the same unknown number. He's getting desperate. You're in danger. The mug slipped from my hand and clattered against the countertop. My heart slammed into my ribs. I typed back with trembling fingers. Who is this? Please tell me. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I can't say yet, but check the church office, top drawer, before she destroys it. She, my mother-in-law. My blood pressure dropped so fast I felt lightheaded. A second message came through. Hurry. I didn't even realize my breathing had turned shallow until I had to grab the counter to steady myself. My hands were shaking so badly, the next message came out barely readable. Why are you helping me? The reply was instant. Because I couldn't help the last girl. My stomach dropped. The last girl? What last girl? I looked toward the stairs, half expecting David to appear to snatch the phone, accuse me of something, block the number, do whatever he needed to keep control. But the house was silent. The kettle whistled low in the background. My mind raced. The church office, her drawer, danger, last girl. Pieces swirled like broken glass in my head, sharp edges, unclear shapes. I had to go. I threw on a sweater, stuffed the phone in my pocket, and grabbed my keys. As I stepped outside, a cool morning breeze brushed my cheek, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and pine. For the first time in weeks, I was grateful to be outside that house. The church looked peaceful from the outside, the big stained glass windows glowing softly in the early sunlight, the white steeple standing tall as if nothing dark had ever passed beneath it. I parked in the side lot, my hands still trembling as I held the steering wheel. The church grounds were empty, as they should be on a Saturday. But as I walked toward the back office door, a strange chill crawled across my skin. I unlocked the door with the spare key my mother-in-law insisted I hold for emergencies, never imagining that the emergency would be discovering her secrets. As soon as I stepped inside, the air changed. The office had a sterile, cold stillness like a museum of lies. Her desk sat perfectly arranged, framed scripture verses, a vase of dried lavender, perfectly stacked church bulletins, and her oversized leather Bible. The top drawer. I walked toward it slowly, like approaching a sleeping animal that might wake. My hand hesitated on the drawer handle. What was I about to see? What could possibly explain her cruelty, her obsession with control, her need to humiliate me in front of strangers? I pulled the drawer open. Inside was a stack of folders, 3 inches thick, labeled in her handwriting, tithers accountability, community discipline reports, and special circumstances. Special circumstances. My fingers hovered over that one. I opened it. My breath caught. Picture after picture of women, different families, different ages, all neatly clipped to reports she had typed herself. Lists of sinful behaviors, inappropriate conduct, potential for disruption to the church community. These weren't pastoral notes. These were dossiers. Personal files on real people, on their marriages, finances, weaknesses, anything she could use to manipulate or control. My hand shook as I flipped through them. Then I reached the last folder. My name. My entire name. First, middle, last. Underlined twice. I felt my knees weaken. The file was thicker than the others. I opened it. And something inside me broke. There were notes going back years before I even married David. Notes about my demeanor, my defiance, my resentment toward authority, my spiritual instability. She had been documenting my life before I even became part of her family. Photos, copies of texts, screenshots of posts from years ago, even records of arguments between me and David, arguments I thought were private. At the very back was a printed email, the ink slightly faded. It was from David to her. She's too emotional, too sensitive, too independent. I'm trying to guide her, but she's resisting. My chest cracked open. He had been feeding her information. Complaints, concerns, private moments from day one. Their alliance wasn't new. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. A slow, coordinated erosion of my confidence. A calculated campaign. A betrayal in the purest sense. I covered my mouth, tears spilling hot and fast. But then, there was something else in the folder. A name I didn't recognize. Case Report Julia M. The pages were stamped Confidential Incident File. I read the first paragraph. My heart turned to ice. Julia had been engaged to David, and she had left. Not because she wasn't ready, not because they weren't compatible, as his mother always implied, but because she accused him of emotional manipulation, isolation, and escalating behavior that made her feel unsafe. The church board dismissed her concerns. His mother silenced her. And Julia disappeared. The unknown number. The last girl. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the desk to stay steady. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining anything. I was next. As I stood there in the dimly lit office, surrounded by the cold truth, page after page of surveillance, coordination, psychological warfare, a single thought formed in my mind. I have to get out. I have to survive. Because this wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about control. And control, when threatened, becomes very dangerous. Very dangerous.
I don't remember leaving the church office. One moment, I was staring at the papers, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The next, I was outside, leaning against the brick wall, the morning breeze cooling the tears on my cheeks. My legs felt weak, not from exhaustion, but from the cruel weight of the truth finally settling into place. Everything suddenly made sense. The judgmental stares from churchwomen I barely knew, the cold shift in my husband's behavior, so gradual I questioned my own perception. The way my mother-in-law watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, calculating, preparing. They were building a case against me long before I ever stepped foot into that church. And now I had evidence. More than evidence, I had the whole blueprint of their deception. My phone buzzed again. The unknown number. My hand trembled as I lifted it. Did you find it? I swallowed hard. Yes, there are files. On me. On other women. Who are you? A long pause. Then, someone who used to sit where you sit. A cold heaviness pressed against my chest. Julia. It had to be her. Or someone who had known her. Someone who had seen the fallout. I typed, "Where are you? Can I meet you? I need help." A new message appeared. This one slower, like the sender was choosing every word carefully. Be careful who you trust. He will come looking when he realizes what's missing. I froze. Missing? My eyes darted back toward the church. In my panic, in the rush of adrenaline and terror, I hadn't realized I still had the folder in my hand. I had walked out with it. My fingerprints, my presence, my scent. Everything that screamed, I know. I clutched the folder tightly to my chest, my mind racing in circles. I had just crossed a line I could never step back from. When I pulled into our driveway, something felt wrong immediately. The curtains were slightly parted, not enough for an accident, not enough for a breeze, but enough for someone to stand behind them and watch the street. Watch me. I held the folder like a shield as I walked inside. The door creaked the way it always did, but today the sound was sharp, almost mocking. The living room was spotless, but not in a comforting way, in a suffocating way. The air felt thick, like the house wasn't breathing. Then I saw it. David, sitting at the dining table. Still, silent, staring straight ahead. Not at me, just ahead, like he had been waiting. My heart thumped so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. "Where were you?" he asked, without turning. His voice was calm, too calm. My fingers tightened around the folder hidden behind me. I went for a drive." "You didn't take your jacket." His tone carried no emotion, no irritation, no suspicion, just observation. "I wasn't gone long," I said quietly. Silence stretched between us like a long, thin wire ready to snap. His eyes finally turned toward me, and something inside me shrank, because the man I married wasn't sitting there anymore. His expression was empty, not cold, not angry, just hollow, as if the mask he'd always worn had slipped, and what remained was something unrecognizable. "Come sit," he said. Not a request, a command. My throat tightened. I need to put something away in our room." He tilted his head slightly, a slow, deliberate movement. "What is it?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Just some papers." "What kind of papers?" The words were soft, too soft. His eyes lowered to my hands. I realized then he could see the corner of the folder. I stepped back instinctively. David stood, a smooth, chilling rise from his chair. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice dropping lower, steadier. "What papers?" In that moment, I knew something with perfect clarity. If I handed him the folder, I would lose this battle. If I didn't, I might lose more than that. I forced my legs to move. "I said I needed to put them away," I whispered. He took a step forward. I stepped back. He took another. My back hit the wall. "Give it to me," he said, stretching out his hand. His eyes were not human in that moment. They were hungry, territorial, threatened. "I'm not giving you anything," I said softly. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Panic. Real panic. Because he knew. He knew I had found something I wasn't supposed to. He lunged. I dodged to the left, clutching the folder, nearly slipping on the hardwood floor. My shoulder hit the edge of the doorway, pain shooting down my arm, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom. He slammed his palm against the door. "Open it!" My whole body shook. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't strategic. It was unhinged. "Open this door right now!" I held the folder against my chest and slid to the floor, my breath coming fast and high. Then, silence. Complete silence. I didn't know which was worse, his rage or his quiet. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Finally, I heard the front door slam. The house rattled. His car engine roared to life and sped down the street. I waited, still shaking, still holding the folder, still breathing in shallow, ragged bursts. He had gone to the one place he knew his mother was, the church. Which meant I had a small window, a tiny, fragile window, to do something I should have done a long time ago. Run. I grabbed a backpack, shoved the folder inside, and stuffed my phone charger, wallet, and a pair of jeans on top. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. My hands trembled as I opened the message. "If you're leaving, don't go alone. I'll help you. Just tell me where." I swallowed, blinking through tears. "Who are you? Really?" A long pause. Then, "Someone who used to know what happens when you stay." My heart cracked open because I suddenly understood. I wasn't just escaping my husband, I was escaping a system. One that had swallowed women before me. One that would swallow me, too, if I hesitated. I typed, "Meet me, please. I need help." 3 dots appeared. Then, "I'm already on my way." The house felt like it was holding its breath. Every shadow stretched longer. Every sound echoed louder. Every minute felt stolen.
I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my backpack, listening for the sound of David's car returning. Silence. But silence didn't mean safety. My phone buzzed. The same unknown number. I'm 2 minutes away. Don't stand outside. Wait until I text again. My pulse hammered. I crept toward the window and peeked between the blinds. Nothing but our quiet, manicured street. The one my mother-in-law loved to boast about. The one with perfect lawns and perfect facades, hiding imperfect things. Another message arrived. Is anyone else home? I swallowed. No, but he knows I found something. He'll come back angry. 3 dots appeared, then we don't have much time. I exhaled shakily and tightened the straps of my backpack. Then I heard it. A car engine. Not loud, not rushed, controlled. I froze. Part of me whispered, "It's him." Part of me whispered, "Run." I crouched beneath the window and peeked outside again. A small gray sedan pulled up across the street. Tinted windows. Nothing remarkable. Then my phone buzzed. That's me. My breath caught. I typed, "How do I know I can trust you?" A moment passed. Then the reply arrived. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be driving a car with cameras on every corner watching me. Come now, quickly. I didn't know if that calmed me or scared me more. I slowly descended the stairs, every step creaking like it was betraying me. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. The kind of quiet that felt watched. At the front door, my hand hesitated on the knob. What if this was another trap? What if I was walking from one predator into the hands of another? The door suddenly rattled from a gust of wind outside. I flinched. No. Staying was death by inches. Leaving was a gamble, but at least it was movement. I opened the door, stepped outside, and pulled it shut behind me. The breeze hit my face like a slap of freedom and fear mixed together. The sedan's back door opened, and a woman stepped out. My breath hitched. She looked older than I expected. Late 40s, maybe early 50s? Tired eyes, but alert. A faded scar running from her jawline to her neck, like a story no one had asked her to tell. "Get in," she said softly, "before anyone sees." I stayed frozen. She nodded slowly, reading my fear like a book she'd read before. "I know what you're thinking. I had the same fear the night I left." Her voice trembled just barely, but I heard it. "You were in the church?" I whispered. Her eyes darkened. "I was married to one of them." My breath caught. "One of who?" I asked. She looked around as if the trees had ears. Then she stepped closer and whispered, "One of the men your husband reports to." My stomach dropped to the floor. She gestured towards the car with urgency. "Please, get in. Every second we stand here, the harder this becomes." The world spun around me as I forced my feet to move. I climbed into the passenger seat. She slid in behind the wheel. The door shut with a soft, terrifying click. "Seatbelt," she said. "They'll follow us if we're not careful." I buckled it, my breath shaking. She pressed the ignition, and the car hummed to life. As she pulled away from the curb, I felt a tremor run through my entire body. Not from fear, not from adrenaline, from the realization that everything I thought I knew about my husband, about the church, about my marriage, wasn't just a lie. It was a system, a machine, and I had just stepped outside of it. We drove in silence for a long moment. Finally, I whispered, "What's your name?" She glanced at me, her jaw tightening. "Ava." I blinked. That's not what I expected.
She gave a hollow laugh. It wasn't what they expected either. The road opened up ahead of us, a long stretch of freedom I wasn't sure I deserved yet. I swallowed hard. Why are you helping me? Ava kept her eyes on the road. When I escaped, nobody helped me, not one person. I promised myself if I ever saw another woman being pulled into that machine, I wouldn't stay silent. She paused, her voice cracking. Silence is what killed Julia. My chest constricted. Julia. The name haunted the church like a ghost nobody acknowledged. What happened to her? I asked. Ava exhaled a slow, painful release of something she'd held in too long. She tried to leave. They made sure she never tried again. My blood turned cold. Before I could respond, her phone vibrated against the dashboard. She glanced at it and her face drained of color. What is it? I whispered. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. They know you're gone. My heart slammed into my ribs. Who? I whispered, even though I knew. Ava pressed harder on the gas. She didn't look at me when she answered. They all.
Ava didn't speed. No, she drove with a strange, deliberate calm, as if panic would only draw attention. But her knuckles stayed white on the wheel, and every time she checked the rearview mirror, her eyes sharpened. I sat as still as I could, clutching my backpack like it held the last pieces of my identity. What does that mean? I finally whispered. They know I'm gone? Ava's jaw flexed. David checked the home cameras. The church has access to all their members' surveillance. He's probably already called them. My breath caught. He'll come after me. He'll try, she said quietly, but he won't reach you first. Something in her tone cracked through me, a truth she didn't want to say, but couldn't keep in anymore. You keep saying they, I whispered. Who is they, Ava? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she sighed, tired, defeated. Your mother-in-law might be the public face of that church, but she isn't the power behind it. She paused. She serves them, just like your husband does. I stared at her. What are you talking about? It's just a church. A cruel one, a hypocritical one, but no, she said softly. It stopped being just a church years ago. The words sank like stones in my stomach. Ava turned onto an empty rural road, long and lined with overgrown pines that leaned inward like they were listening. When I tried to leave my husband, they followed me for 3 months. They called my job, visited my neighbors, stole mail from my porch, everything to corral me back into their control. My voice shook. So how did you get out? Her jaw tightened. I didn't. Not really. I disappeared enough that they couldn't use me anymore. She gave me a quick glance. But your mother-in-law, has staked her reputation on you. She humiliated you publicly. She painted you as the fallen woman she was correcting. You leaving now will make her look like a liar. I swallowed. And she can't allow that? A humorless smile touched Ava's lips. That woman survives on perception. If the congregation believes she can't control her own daughter-in-law, she loses power, influence, money. You threatened that. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. The humiliation, the sermon, the way she dragged my name through mud, smiling like she was washing her hands in holy water. She wasn't correcting me. She was securing her throne. Ava's next words came so quietly, I almost missed them. And powerful people rarely let their thrones wobble. A chill crawled up my spine. After another 20 minutes, Ava turned down a dirt path, nearly swallowed by trees. The branches brushed the sides of the car, scratching the paint. Where are we going? I whispered. To a safe house. It's not much, but they don't know about it. They know about everything, I murmured.
Not this, Ava said firmly. I used a false name when I rented it. The cash came from a source they can't trace. What source? Ava hesitated. Then, my daughter. I turned sharply. You have a daughter? A flash of pain crossed her face. Had, she corrected softly. She passed 10 years ago, but before she died, she left me money. Money her father didn't know about. I looked at her differently then, not just as a stranger, but a woman stitched together with grief and resilience. A woman who'd lost everything and still chose to save someone else. Finally, we reached a small weathered cabin tucked so deep in the woods it looked like the trees grew around it to protect it. Ava cut the engine. Silence swallowed us. My heartbeat thudded loud enough to hear. Go inside, she said. I'll bring your things. And then we need to talk, before your husband calls again. I stepped out of the car, the earth soft beneath my feet, pine needles muffling my movements. The cabin smelled of old wood and dust, but it felt safe. Ava followed me in and shut the door softly behind her. I dropped my backpack onto an armchair. What now? I whispered. Ava exhaled. Now, she said, I tell you the truth about your husband and about your mother-in-law and why you were never meant to leave. My stomach twisted. Eva, what are you trying to tell me? She looked at me, really looked at me, with the expression of someone carrying a truth so heavy it had reshaped her entire spine. And then she said, David was raised for this, groomed for it, trained to trap a woman like you. I stared at her, my mouth open, but no sound coming out. But Ava wasn't finished. She added, and your mother-in-law? She isn't running a church. She's running an empire of loyalty and fear. And she needs David and his wife to stay under her thumb. I sank onto the nearest chair, feeling the world tilt. And then Ava delivered the final blow. You weren't his wife, sweetheart. You were his assignment.
I felt the words land like stones in my chest. Assignment. The word bounced in my mind. Heavy, cruel, impossible. You mean all those years? I whispered, my voice trembling. All the smiles, the dinners, the late-night talks. It was just, yes, Ava said softly, almost regretfully. It was all rehearsed. David knew how to make you feel loved, needed, safe, while your mother-in-law made sure every step you took was measured, watched, controlled. I sank deeper into the chair, clutching my knees. My hands shook so violently I couldn't hold them still. I don't understand, I stammered. Why me? Why not someone else? Ava sat across from me, her eyes shadowed by memory. She saw something in you, strength, intelligence, a backbone. But she also saw fear, how quickly you would doubt yourself. That combination made you perfect. Perfect for humiliation, perfect for control. I felt bile rise. Anger and shame tangled together. The humiliation at church, the whispers, the cold glances from people I had once called friends, it wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. They never wanted you to leave. You stepping out of line would make her look weak. And God forbid anyone sees a weakness in the matriarch. Your humiliation wasn't an accident. It was a public performance to keep everyone in line. Tears blurred my vision. So all this time, it wasn't me failing? It was her? Yes, Ava said firmly. It was never you. It was her empire, her power, her control, and she thought nothing of using you as the pawn. I felt my chest tighten, my throat raw. I had spent months, years even, blaming myself, wondering if I wasn't good enough, if I had failed as a wife, as a daughter-in-law. But now the truth slashed through my self-doubt like a blade. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't ever my fault.
Ava leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But knowing the truth doesn't make it easier. You have to act. You have to protect yourself. And you have to stop her from doing this to anyone else. I looked at her, numb and terrified, but a spark of determination flared inside me. How? I asked. Ava smiled faintly, grimly. We start by documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every incident. Then we confront her on her stage, in her church, where she thought she was untouchable. I swallowed hard, fear and anger warring inside me, but the congregation, my husband, they will see the truth, Ava said. You won't just be standing up for yourself, you'll be revealing her to the world. And when they see her cruelty, her manipulation, her lies, they'll have to believe you. I drew in a shaky breath, my hands clenched into fists. I'm ready, I whispered. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of being humiliated. I want her to know that I am not a pawn, that I am not weak, that I... Ava reached across and took my hand. You are strong, she said, stronger than she'll ever be, and the world is about to see it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Real, trembling human power. The kind that comes from standing up after being pushed down. From choosing yourself when others try to define you. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the woods, I made a promise. I would confront her. I would reveal the truth. And I would no longer be afraid. Because the woman who humiliated me, who manipulated me, who tried to break me in front of the world, had underestimated me. And that was about to be her greatest mistake.
The days that followed were a strange mix of fear, anger, and careful plotting. I moved like a shadow in my own home, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Could I confront her directly, in front of the congregation? Could I do it without breaking down? Ava had insisted we prepare meticulously. If you stumble, she wins, she said, voice steady, her fingers tapping across the tabletop like a metronome. We need evidence, witnesses, written accounts, anything she can't spin. I spent hours combing through old emails, church bulletins, and messages my mother-in-law had sent behind my back. Every small act of manipulation, every underhanded comment, every attempt to tarnish my reputation was documented. The more I dug, the sicker I felt, but also the stronger. One afternoon, Ava and I met at the coffee shop I used to frequent before the chaos. The scent of roasted beans and warm pastries filled the air, but my stomach twisted with anxiety. You have to imagine it, Ava said softly, leaning across the table. Visualize the confrontation. Know your words. Know your power. You aren't a victim anymore. You're reclaiming your story. I nodded, trying to absorb her calm determination. My hands shook as I sipped the coffee, but inside a fire was growing. Each detail I recalled, the sneers, the subtle threats, the casual humiliation at church, fueled a new strength I hadn't realized I possessed. At night, I practiced in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back, weary and haunted, but also fierce. I spoke the words aloud. I am not a pawn. I am not weak. I will not be humiliated again. It felt strange, almost foreign, to speak with such certainty. Yet, with each repetition, my voice grew steadier. I began to feel it, the power that came from owning my truth. I also had to prepare emotionally. My husband, David, had been part of the manipulation, whether knowingly or not. I had to anticipate his reaction, his excuses, his attempts to silence me. But deep down, I knew that his loyalty to his mother wouldn't protect her when the evidence was clear. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept. Every scenario ran through my mind, the worst case, the best case, the unimaginable. I laid out the documents, the emails, the photographs, each one a dagger of truth waiting to pierce her carefully constructed facade.
By morning, the fear had transformed into resolve. I dressed carefully, choosing a cream blouse and a subtle scarf, something that said calm authority, not aggression. I needed to appear composed, dignified, unshakable. Ava walked me to the church doors, her hand warm on my shoulder. The familiar sound of organ music drifted through the hallways, mingling with the murmur of the congregation. The smell of polished wood and faint candle wax brought back memories of that first Sunday I had walked in, nervous and hopeful. But today, hope was tinged with something far stronger, determination. As I stepped into the bright, echoing sanctuary, I felt every pair of eyes on me. My mother-in-law's face, radiant and unshakable, turned toward me. The congregation paused, sensing tension, whispers snaking through the pews like wildfire. I straightened my shoulders. My heart raced, but my voice, when I spoke, would not waver. Today, the truth would be heard. Today, her power would be challenged. And today, I would no longer be silent.
The sanctuary was alive with quiet murmurs as I walked down the aisle, each step deliberate, each heartbeat a drum in my chest. The polished wooden floor reflected the golden light streaming through the stained glass windows, painting the room in shards of color that felt almost surreal. My mother-in-law sat in her usual front row pew, her posture immaculate, her hands folded as if she were preparing to bless the congregation. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw it a flicker of something unsteady, quickly masked by her practiced smile. I approached the podium with calm determination, letting the hush settle around me like a cloak. The organist played softly, but I barely noticed the melody. All I could focus on was her and the web of lies she had spun, suffocating me and controlling those around her. I cleared my throat, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Good morning," I began, the words resonating through the cavernous space. "I've come today to share something that's been hidden for too long." Eyes turned toward me, friends, neighbors, familiar faces. Their curiosity was palpable, a current that energized my resolve. My mother-in-law's smile faltered, just slightly, and I seized the moment. For months, I've been humiliated, whispered about, and shamed publicly by someone I trusted, someone who claims to uphold God's teachings, I continued, my tone even, but edged with quiet fire. I have evidence of lies, manipulation, and attempts to tarnish my reputation, and today I bring the truth. I laid the documents on the podium, each sheet a silent testament to the deception. Emails, photos, notes, all pointing to the careful orchestration of her control, the lies whispered behind closed doors, the financial bribes and false stories told to the congregation. The room held its breath. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, and yet I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of silence was lifted. Her face hardened, lips pressed into a thin line. "What is this?" she said, voice sharp but controlled, the calm piety she wielded like armor starting to chip. "This is proof," I replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Proof that the woman who publicly shamed me, who humiliated me in front of all of you, has been deceiving us, this congregation, my family, me." A murmur spread, whispers threading through the pews like wind through autumn leaves. Some people gasped, others leaned in, eyes wide, shock etching their features. She tried to recover, waving a hand as if to dismiss the documents. "These are lies," she exclaimed, but her voice wavered just enough to betray her uncertainty. "No," I said firmly, "these are facts, and I will not be silenced any longer. I will not allow someone to manipulate God's house to hurt me and others for her own gain." The congregation was stunned into silence, the tension almost tangible. And in that moment, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the cruel power my mother-in-law wielded, but the quiet, unshakable power of truth, of finally standing up for myself. A few members of the congregation whispered among themselves, heads nodding subtly, while others stared, caught between shock and disbelief.
She tried to recover, but the documents, the undeniable evidence, had pierced the carefully constructed image she had projected for decades. And in that sacred place, with the eyes of those around us witnessing the truth, I finally felt my voice strong, clear, and unbroken. Today, I was no longer a victim.
The silence that had followed my declaration hung heavy for a heartbeat before it fractured into whispers, murmurs, and sudden gasps. The warmth of the sunlight through the stained glass seemed to mock the chill crawling down my spine. Every pair of eyes was on us, some incredulous, some appalled, some quietly nodding in understanding. I watched as a few members of the congregation leaned toward each other, their lips moving in hurried, hushed conversations. I caught Mrs. Thompson, one of the church elders, shaking her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was subtle, but it was support, and it bolstered my courage. My mother-in-law's composure began to crumble, her carefully crafted mask slipping as her fingers tightened around her hymnal. "You dare bring this here, in God's house?" she spat, her voice rising in pitch, though the timbre of fear leaked beneath the anger. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I dare," I said firmly, "because this is God's house, and truth is His. You used His name to hurt me, to manipulate, to control, but I will not let that continue." A few pews back, some congregants murmured, "She's right," and I felt a ripple of murmurs growing stronger. Heads turned to my mother-in-law, some eyes narrowing in disbelief, others brimming with judgment. The once respected matriarch of the church looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the very place she had long commanded authority. I moved closer to the podium, speaking directly to the congregation now, letting my voice carry. For too long, I stayed silent, hoping things would change. But silence only protects the wrongdoer. Today, I stand here not to shame, but to reveal the truth. Let us honor honesty, justice, and the dignity of every member of this church. A few young women nodded, their faces bright with relief, as if my courage had lifted a veil they themselves had struggled to pierce. Mr. Carter, the choir director, whispered something to his wife, and they both glanced at my mother-in-law with cautious suspicion. The tension was palpable. I could feel the weight of decades of hidden manipulation pressing down, and yet the air seemed lighter. The truth has a way of breathing life into the spaces it touches. Finally, a hand rose from the back pew. Reverend Lewis, the assistant pastor, stood slowly, his expression somber. He said, "We must hear both sides, but these documents cannot be ignored." His eyes lingered on the papers I had laid out. The room was divided, some shocked, some empathetic, and others staring with dawning realization. The facade my mother-in-law had upheld for so long was cracking, and the first stones of justice were being placed. I felt a quiet power settle in my chest, not vindictive, not boastful, just real. I had faced the storm, and now it was no longer just about me. It was about truth, accountability, and finally seeing justice in action. I met my mother-in-law's eyes one last time. No hatred, only resolve. I said softly, my voice carrying across the room, echoing off the high ceilings, "This ends today. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more hiding behind piety to control and harm." And as murmurs filled the sanctuary once more, I realized I had reclaimed my voice, and with it, my dignity. The room seemed to shift around us, charged with a current I couldn't see, but could feel deep in my bones. Every whisper felt like a ripple, every sidelong glance like a wave of judgment or sympathy. My mother-in-law's face had turned pale, the fire in her eyes now flickering with panic. "Do you think this is some game?" she hissed under her breath, stepping closer to me, her voice low but venomous enough that the pews tensed. You'll ruin everything you've ever known here. I didn't flinch. I could see it. The mask was gone. Beneath her carefully crafted respectability, she was just a woman terrified of being exposed. I won't ruin anything, I said, quietly, deliberately. I'm only showing the truth. The congregation deserves honesty, not manipulation. A few people murmured agreement, and I felt the fragile thread of support stretch between us. It was subtle, yes, but it existed. The realization that I was not entirely alone, that I had allies, strengthened me. Behind me, the choir director cleared his throat and whispered to Reverend Lewis. I heard part of the conversation, enough to know they were deciding how to respond publicly. It was slow, deliberate, just the way justice often creeps in. My husband appeared then, stepping through the aisle with that awkward hesitancy I knew too well. His eyes flicked between his mother and me, confusion and anger warring on his face. What's happening?" he asked, his voice tight, betraying the panic I knew he felt as the foundation of his family's carefully hidden world began to quake. "Your mother has been manipulating and controlling everyone here for years," I said, keeping my voice calm but steady. "Bribes, lies, rumors. She built her reputation on the suffering of others. It's time for the truth to be seen." The shock hit him in waves. I could see the color drain from his face as he realized this wasn't just some petty argument or misunderstanding. This was the unraveling of everything he thought he knew about his family. Pew by pew, the congregation began to react more openly. Some shook their heads, some whispered prayers under their breath, and a few even stood, hesitant but determined to back me up. I could see the tide turning in subtle gestures, a nod, a tightened jaw, a sideways glance of agreement. And then it happened. Mrs. Jenkins, the oldest member of the congregation, rose to her feet. "We've all known things weren't right," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I may have stayed silent, but I cannot anymore. I believe her." The words hit like a hammer against the fragile walls my mother-in-law had built. She faltered, lips parting, eyes darting frantically to the faces she had thought loyal to her. And in that moment, I realized this was no longer just about me. This was about exposing a pattern, about shining light into corners long hidden. I straightened, took a deep breath, and let the weight of the moment settle. The first stones of justice had been laid, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew this. Truth had found a voice, and I was determined to see it all the way through. The murmurs in the church settled into a tense silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I felt every eye on me, some curious, some skeptical, but all attentive. My mother-in-law's hands trembled, clutching the edges of her pulpit as if it could anchor her to the world she thought she controlled. I don't know what you're implying," she stammered, trying to regain her composure. Her voice, usually commanding and crisp, was shaky and brittle now. I stepped closer, holding my ground. "You've spent years pretending to be the moral compass of this congregation," I said slowly, letting each word sink in. "But behind those smiles, you've lied, bribed, and manipulated. You humiliated me today, in front of everyone, claiming I was unworthy, but the real shame belongs to those who've hidden the truth for too long." Gasps rippled through the pews. I could see the shock etched on familiar faces, the ones who had nodded politely at her words week after week, now confronted with the reality they'd ignored. My husband's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, maybe to defend her, maybe to silence me, but I cut him off with a look. Not today. Not now. This wasn't about fear or silence anymore. It was about justice. She has been controlling not just her family, but all of you. Bribes, false stories, spreading fear. These are the tools she uses to maintain power. Today, I refuse to be a victim any longer. I stand here in this house of worship, telling the truth. I saw it then, the crack in her facade. Her perfect posture slumped, her eyes darted nervously, pleading for anyone to step in. But the congregation's gaze was no longer hers to command. One of the younger women, someone I had seen quietly helping around the church, stood. "We've always sensed something was off," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Thank you for speaking up. It's time we face the truth." The room was shifting beneath us. Allies appeared in the quietest ways, a hand squeezing another, a whispered agreement, heads turning away from my mother-in-law, refusing to meet her eyes. Her power, which had seemed untouchable, was crumbling in real time. My heart pounded, but I held steady. I knew this confrontation would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire congregation. The person who had wielded shame and manipulation as weapons was finally exposed, and the truth had a momentum of its own. I took a slow breath, letting the weight of my words settle. This was more than revenge. It was reclamation, justice, and finally liberation from a web of deceit that had haunted my life for too long. And in that moment, I realized fear had no power over me anymore. The silence in the church was thick at first, but it didn't last. Whispers started softly, then grew louder, like a ripple turning into a wave. People were talking, questioning, exchanging looks that spoke volumes. Some avoided my mother-in-law's gaze, others leaned closer to hear what I had just revealed. I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear because I was standing in front of dozens of eyes that had known me as just another member of the congregation, and exhilaration because the truth had finally broken through years of control. Then a few voices, steady, firm, began to speak aloud. She lied to us. She always controlled everything. I noticed the way she manipulated situations to her advantage. I felt pressured to stay silent, but now I see why. It was as though I had released a dam that had been building for years. Others had suffered quietly, afraid of the woman we had all once revered. And now the floodgates had opened. My mother-in-law's face went pale. She tried to speak, her voice sharp, like a whip cracking in anger, but the words were drowned out by murmurs of acknowledgement and disbelief. One by one, people began standing, sharing small truths they had witnessed, confirming what I had just said. I could feel my husband shift beside me. He looked torn, trapped between loyalty to his mother and the undeniable truth that she had abused her influence over all of us. "Enough," my mother-in-law finally shouted, though the word lacked its usual authority. Her trembling hands betrayed her. "You're all mistaken. These lies will not stand." But the room no longer belonged to her. The congregation had collectively seen through the mask, and there was no turning back. I took a deep breath, meeting her eyes. "No more lies," I said, softly but firmly. "Not today, not ever again." There was a pause, heavy with tension. Then a woman I had never spoken to before stepped forward, her voice steady. "We need transparency. We can't let fear rule here anymore." I realized then that this confrontation was bigger than me. It was about justice, about truth, and about breaking cycles of manipulation that had been normalized for far too long. And in that moment, I understood that my courage had ignited something larger, a movement for honesty, for accountability, and for liberation. The congregation's whispers became a chorus, and I felt a deep, quiet relief wash over me. The weight I had carried alone for so long was now shared, and for the first time in years, I was not afraid. The moment after the congregation's murmurs rose to a chorus, I noticed the subtle shifts around me. People were no longer polite observers. They were participants in a reckoning long overdue. My mother-in-law's face had drained of all color, her lips pressed tightly together as if to hold back words that could no longer change anything. I felt my husband stiffen beside me. He hadn't spoken yet, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. I realized he was torn, loyalty to his mother and the undeniable weight of truth now colliding in his chest. Then, quietly, at first, a few of the church elders exchanged glances and murmured among themselves. It wasn't long before the senior pastor, who had once been her close confidant, stepped forward. His eyes were steady, his voice calm yet resolute. "Ma'am, he said, addressing my mother-in-law. "We need to address these accusations. Our congregation deserves honesty. No one is above accountability." I could feel my chest rise and fall rapidly. My words earlier had shaken her public image, but this was the first institutional response. People who had looked up to her for decades were now listening to a different truth. A ripple of whispers spread through the pews. Some nodded in agreement, while others simply stared, stunned. It was a strange mix of vindication and apprehension. Justice was slow, but it had finally begun. My mother-in-law's face opened her mouth, probably to deny everything, but no sound came. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, the trembling growing. For years, she had wielded fear like a shield, but now the shield had cracked. And then something unexpected happened. A few members, whom I had never spoken to, approached me quietly after the service. Their eyes were filled with a mixture of relief and apology. "We knew, we suspected, but we didn't want to interfere," one whispered. "Thank you for speaking up. You've given us courage." I felt tears prick my eyes, not from shame, but from the quiet acknowledgement that my truth had empowered others. The church, once her stage for control, had begun to shift. The first consequences were unfolding, and I could see that her carefully built empire of manipulation was starting to crumble. Even as the tension lingered, I felt a strange lightness, a sense that the nightmare that had haunted me for years was finally giving way to a new reality, one where truth, justice, and courage could survive, even thrive, despite fear and intimidation.
The following Sunday, the church felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, whispers bouncing off the walls, eyes darting toward my mother-in-law as she entered. She tried to smile, but it was forced, brittle, and everyone noticed. Even her closest allies avoided meeting her gaze. I sat quietly in the pew, my hands folded, heart pounding. I had rehearsed what I would say, but now the weight of witnessing the fallout firsthand made my stomach twist with nerves. The congregation's reaction would determine how far-reaching the consequences would be. Then it happened. One by one, members approached the pulpit during the announcements. Some quietly voiced concerns, others asked questions about past financial dealings, about favoritism, about manipulation they had long suspected but never dared to confront. My mother-in-law's composure began to crack before everyone's eyes. Her voice wavered when she tried to speak. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but the room was already against her. The subtle power she had wielded for years had evaporated in a matter of minutes. Even the choir director, someone who had always seemed loyal to her, shook his head. "Ma'am, we've always respected you, but this cannot continue." His words hit harder than any accusation I could have made. I noticed my husband shift uncomfortably. He had been silent all this time, and I wondered what he was thinking. Did he finally realize the depth of her manipulation? Did he finally see that loyalty to her had cost me years of peace and dignity? By the end of the service, the whispers had turned into conversations, and the congregation was openly questioning her. People who had once feared her influence were now emboldened. Some even approached me afterward, offering apologies for not standing up sooner. Their support warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. It was strange seeing her once untouchable persona crumble in real time. The same woman who had humiliated me publicly was now shrinking, her power dissipating like smoke in the sunlight. And though part of me wanted to gloat, I held my composure. This was about justice, not revenge. For the first time in years, I felt a shift, not just in the church, but in my own life. I had spoken the truth, and it had taken root. I could see it reflected in the eyes of the congregation, in the hesitant nods, in the quiet acknowledgement that courage and honesty could dismantle even the most entrenched tyranny. I left the church that day not as a victim, but as someone who had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her place in a world that had too long tried to silence her. And as I stepped out into the warm afternoon sunlight, I realized that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I no longer had to live in fear.
A week had passed since the church fallout, and the tension hadn't dissipated. My mother-in-law avoided my gaze whenever we crossed paths. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. but I knew it was time. I needed closure, not just for me, but for my own sense of peace. I asked her to meet me at the small cafe near her house. She hesitated at first, fingers tightening around her purse, her posture stiff with resistance. But eventually, she agreed, probably sensing that avoidance would no longer shield her. When she arrived, I could see the cracks in her carefully curated facade. Her makeup was perfect, her hair immaculate, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a vulnerability she had never shown publicly. I I don't know why you called me here, she began, voice brittle. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm but firm. I needed to say this directly. The humiliation, the manipulation, the lies. It has to stop. I cannot and will not allow this to continue in my life or in my family. Her hands trembled slightly. I I only wanted what was best for the family. I shook my head. What you consider best has hurt more than it has helped. You've tried to control every aspect of our lives, spread rumors, and undermine me at every turn. That stops now. I will no longer be silenced or made to feel small. There was a pause. The cafe was quiet, save for the clinking of spoons against coffee cups from distant tables. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret, not contrived, but real, human, flawed. I I don't know how much I had hurt you, she whispered. I nodded slowly, letting my own emotions settle. Acknowledgement is the first step. The next is change. You cannot continue to use fear and shame as tools. You need to make amends where you can, and you need to allow me my dignity. She lowered her gaze, a quiet understanding settling over her. I could see that the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. I felt a weight lift off of my shoulders, a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter. I had confronted the source of my pain, spoken my truth, and demanded accountability. My life wasn't perfect. There would still be challenges, but I had reclaimed my voice, my sense of self-worth, and my peace. The sunlight felt warmer that afternoon, each step away from her a step toward freedom. And for the first time in a long while, I realized my story wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, my resilience, and the life I was finally ready to live. Sitting here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I realize how easily our lives can be shaped by the people around us, sometimes in love, sometimes in pain. But the truth I've learned is this: no one has the right to diminish your worth. Not a mother-in-law, not a spouse, not even the world itself. Healing doesn't come from revenge or anger. It comes from speaking your truth, standing firm in your dignity, and choosing peace over bitterness. My journey wasn't easy, and some days still sting. But each step forward reminded me that I am more than their judgments, more than their manipulations. I am worthy. I am strong. And I am free. Now I turn to you, my dear listener. Have you ever stayed silent when your heart screamed to be heard? Have you ever felt small in the face of someone else's power? Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your voice, and to let your own light shine. If my story touched you, or if it gave you courage to confront your own battles, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. And if you want more real stories of resilience, betrayal, and triumph, subscribe and stay with us here on Voices of Auntie Opal. Because every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard.